Hi, my name is Joan Kelly-Kincade. I'm a strategic sales advisor with Love & Company. And today we're going to speak about process and progress and why it's important to have a process, how that helps us make progress. And when we don't, how we might be doing this thing called drifting. So let's get started. Here are our learning objectives for this presentation. We are going to speak about what process means and what it means to progress. And how does that affect perfection? Is that what we're worried about? We're going to delve into that just a little bit. We're also going to look at this idea of drift and try to understand it a little bit, see where it comes from. And of course, how to stop drift is important. So we'll take a look at that too. We'll have some ideas and tips along the way. So let's get started. Everybody has felt like this at one time or another, right? The Byrds were a band way back in the 60s, and this is a great line for how we feel some days. I don't know what's going on here. I don't know how it's supposed to be. Well, the truth is, that's why we need processes. And even when we have them, sometimes we don't know where we're supposed to be, right? And it makes it hard for us to get progress, for us to build momentum. Well, just what is progress and how do you get it? Let's look at that for a second. Progress number one is not perfection. And in fact, as we know, the best is sometimes the enemy of the good. So it's not about perfection. It's really very simple. It's not brain surgery, and I wish I could tell you I have a magic bullet, but I don't. We're talking about things today that we know matter. We're just trying to figure out why it matters and how it works so that we can do what we want to do about it. So progress is actually quite simple. It's the process of doing something. But most importantly, it is the process of doing something and sticking to it. When we do that, we can say we have a path and we know what our process is. So it's about sticking to the process of doing things. That's what we want to know. Do we do that or not? And we also want to know, is our process a good one? So we'll look at some very easy things to think about to see if a process is a good one or not. And as we said, it's not about perfection. And Confucius also referred to it when he said, better a diamond with a flaw than a pebble without. That sure is true. It's just important to know what the goal is, then let it go and get moving. We want to focus on the doing and not on the end. So let's think about whether our process is a good one or not. We'd like it to be a great one. And as we said, we don't want to focus on the end. We want to focus on the doing. So first of all, pull out your policy and procedure manual or pull out your checklist and affirm that actually you have a process. If you do you recognize the steps? Does everybody on the team recognize the steps? Think about what they are and see if you can define them, agree to them together, affirm the steps. If possible, make a process map and think about all the details that belong on it. And then that will tell you what and who else you might need for the process to work at its best. You might not be able to do this with every process because you're busy and all day long you work through various processes. However, if you have one that's new, start it out by affirming it and figuring out what it is. Or if you have one that you know you're struggling with, or the goal and objective is critical, those might be ones that you really want to confirm that they're working well for you and why. After you use it, evaluate it, rehash it, get together with the team and confirm that it worked well And where it didn't, you want to be willing to improve it. So these are basic steps. And as I said, I know what your day is like, and you're not going to have time to do this on everyone right out of the gate. But pick and choose the important ones or the ones you have suspicions about, and really confirm that it works the way it ought to. So what happens if we lose our way? What happens if we know our process simply isn't working? Well, that's when we start to drift. And that's what this thing called the normalization of deviance is about. Let's take a minute and look at that. First of all, we're all familiar with the idea that we're working with a lot of new normals. The last 2.5 years have really proven that. So what are new normals? They're nothing more than a lot of little changes that add up. They can be a lot of little good changes or a lot of little bad changes. Usually, when they're bad changes, we're deviating gradually over time. And that really brings us to this definition. This definition is for this thing, this theory, called the normalization of deviance. It's a gradual process through which unacceptable practices or standards become treated as acceptable. And this behavior, where we're deviating from what we know is a best practice or a standard or a process or our path, if we repeat those bad behaviors, if you will, over and over time, and nothing really bad happens, that becomes our new normal. And we think we're okay. That's a really tough thing to let happen, but it's easy and it does happen. Diane Vaughn is a professor of sociology at Columbia. And when she was working with NASA during the Challenger disaster, this is something that she theorized, and it has been borne out over and over and over as a real and tangible thing. It's something that's measurable, but while it's happening over time, it's not really noticed, and it becomes somewhat intangible as a result. So little things add up. And once we think it's acceptable to kind of deviate from our standard or from our process, we think it's okay to drift, and we'll drift even more. And when we happen to do that in one process, we tend to do it in other processes too. When that happens, we're entering the dreaded deviation spiral. And this is what it looks like. And what this is showing us is in the middle of the spiral is our original normal. For example, perhaps as a salesperson, I'm to make a certain number of calls every day and know that based on my conversion rate, I'll get a certain number of appointments over the next week or so. But if I deviate from that, and you see deviation number 1, very close to the center, and I make fewer calls than I know are my standard, and then nothing really bad happens because I already had some appointments set up, but I stay at that lower level of calls, and maybe even over time, I drift further. And you can see on this spiral, I'm drifting further and further and further from the original number of calls I was supposed to make. Eventually, I'm not going to have any appointments. And when I don't have any appointments, I won't get any sales. That's when my disaster occurs. Let's look at this another way. On the left is the normal routine. It could be a budget for somebody. So perhaps our executive director or CEO works within the budget and knows that he or she has to make a variance, make assumptions, and drift just a little bit. But when that happens over time, over and over and over, eventually the budget doesn't work anymore, right? This can happen with many things. It can happen with the front desk drifting from answering the phone within 3 rings. It can happen by not scheduling what I want on my life enrichment schedule consistently. And pretty soon my Residents don't depend on the schedule anymore, and they don't sign up for anything. Anytime we drift from a standard that we've confirmed is a good one, it's going to lead to a breakdown someplace. So how do we keep from doing this? Well, if bad changes matter, and they're little and they add up, good changes can make a difference too. Here's what you can do. Keep in mind that when you hear yourself saying things like you see on the screen, it's okay, I'll do it later. This is just a shortcut. Those things add up, and they become things like these examples that you see on the screen. Appointments being canceled, communication taking a nosedive, record keeping becoming less consistent and accurate and trustworthy. These things happen because of what you see on the screen here. Making a decision that I would just let it go. Perhaps it's because I have too many things to think about. Maybe I wasn't being focused. Maybe I was relying on intuition and not a planned and intentional approach. Most important, it happens because when you drift, you're creating the risk that you might not have progress. When you drift, you're creating a risk that you may drift further from your normal plan and not get where you want to go. When you drift, that risk has no memory of what came before. So it piles up over time. And all of these things can happen and mean that you get off course. So what's a person to do? Well, let's add up some little things. Take small intentional steps. Maintain a questioning attitude. Don't assume anything. Remember what we talked about when we said, assess whether you really have a process or not. Take a look at it and build a map and question it and make sure that it actually matters, the steps you're each doing. Don't assume anything. Question things. Remember your internal dialogue. If you hear yourself thinking or saying things that are negative and allow you to slip back, don't make it personal. It doesn't make you a bad person with lousy habits. It means you're doing the best you can. But remember, your best changes every day. And your best is good enough most days. It's not about perfection. It's a process or a situation that needs to be addressed. It's nothing personal. Just maintain a questioning attitude and affirm that you have a process that you believe will get you where you want to go. Remember what we just said. Your best changes every day. You don't have to be perfect. Your process doesn't have to be perfect. But if you think about your steps and you rehash it at the end of a project and tweak it and make it better, over time, not only do you get better over time, but your process gets better over time. As the process gets better, again, you in turn improve and you reach your goals. Always agree on the standards. Always have a time and place that you want this to end up. You want to be here by a certain date, correct? And put things first. Make sure you prepare and do research. Have your tools and resources handy. Remember, if you deviate from the process, just make sure you're going in the right direction. Your process may improve right in the middle of it. That's okay. When that happens, be sure to communicate and be transparent and make sure everybody on the team knows that you still intend to go in the right direction. So what's the opposite? Well, the opposite of the normalization of deviance is the normalization of excellence. The first thing you need is the competence to do each step. Make sure everyone on the team that is part of the process knows how to do each step and why to do each step. That's really important. And then they all have to agree, I own this step, right? And then you have to face facts. You have to know what you need. You have to know what the goals are. You have to know what your limitations are, your capacity, the resources you need, etc. These are the first 3 steps of Admiral Rickover's approach to process excellence. And I love this process. And the fact is, there are 18 or 20 steps. I've just included the top 3 because I think it just gets us started on the right path. So, what did we learn? Perfection can halt progress. Just do. Don't worry about being perfect. Think about the processes, evaluate them, and stick with them. Try not to drift. Stick with your process. Remember to appreciate what your goal is and then set it aside as an idea that you're working for. You want to get there by focusing on the process one step at a time. You want to get there by focusing on doing. Thank you. We went a little bit over our 15 minutes, so I appreciate being able to record this for you. Thank you so much to you and the Leading Age Maryland team.